everyone, welcome back to my class. In today's section, we are going to study about the biology and human welfare. Let's begin our class. What are the basic needs of living organism? Obvious answer, that is food and shelter. It is difficult to survive without food and shelter, right? Based on the mode of nutrition, living organisms are of two types. We have already studied this. What are the two types of living organism? Autotrophs and heterotrophs. What is the meaning of auto? Auto means self. So organism who can prepare their food by their own. We call it as autotroph. What about heterotroph? Heterotrophs are the organism who cannot prepare food on their own and they have to depend on others. They have to depend on others. By this, something clicked in my mind. Ma'am, we can make Maggie. So are we not autotrophs? No, obviously not. You're not autotrophs. For making Maggie, you are getting the packet and all those ready-made things are there. When I say autotrophs who can prepare their own food means who can prepare glucose by their own. For example, the process of photosynthesis done by the plant. So all plants are autotroph. Almost all plants are autotroph, right? Except I can give you an example of insectivorous plant, right? Now, obviously, insectivorous plants will do photosynthesis. Apart from that, they are going to ingest the insects as well, correct? Now, the organisms who can prepare their own food in the sense glucose, we call it as autotroph. Who cannot prepare their own food and depend on the other, we call it as heterotroph. For example, animals. What is parasitism? I'm sure you must have heard about parasite. What is parasite? Parasite is an organism who feed on living organism. Parasites are the organisms who feed on the living organisms, right? Then what is parasitism? It is nothing but it is an intimate, that is close association between two organisms of different species. Mind it, not between the same species. Now if same species will start harming the same species, then what will happen? Obviously one day the species will extinct, right? So we are talking about the different species where one is benefited and the other one is adversely affected, right? So parasitism is nothing but two different organisms of different species are in close connection with each other, close association with each other, out of which one is benefited and other one is affected. For benefit, we use plus sign. For affected, we use negative sign, right? Now, word parasitism came from the Greek word parasitos. Para means at the side of, cytos means food or grain, right? Now, parasitos means one eating at the another's table. That means food was for me, but you people came and ate, right? So, you all are parasite for me, right? Now, the organism that obtain nourishment, we call it as parasite. Now, parasite is getting nourishment. We are not getting nourishment, okay? It is taking our nourishment. So, we call it as gainer to parasite. And then who is loser? Host is the loser, right? Now, types of parasites. We have already drawn this table. If you have not drawn, please draw it. Types of parasite we are going to see first ectoparasite, then endoparasite, hyperparasite, monogenetic and digenetic. Under endoparasite, we are going to study about cytozoic, histozoic and coelozoic. Let's begin. Now, ectoparasite is nothing but the parasite which live on the surface. Ecto means what class? Ecto means outer. So it lives on the surface of the host body. For example, your head lice, itch mites, ticks and copepods on the marine fishes. These are the example of your ectoparasite. Then what is endoparasite? What is the meaning of endo? Endo means inside. Endo means inside. So this kind of parasite, where it will be present? It will be present inside the host body or inside the host cell. What are the three types of endoparasite? If it is present inside the cell, cytozoic. Cyto means cell or cytoplasm. So if it is present inside the cell, we call it as cytozoic. When I am saying inside the cell, it is going to be intracellular. What is the meaning of intracellular? Intracellular is nothing but within the cell. Histo we use for tissue. So when it is in the tissue, so if I am saying in the tissue means many cells, similar cell which has similar origin, similar function is going to make tissue. So it is in between the cell. When I talk about in between the cell, we call it as intercellular. Then what is coelozoic? Do you remember we studied about the coelom? That is fluid filled cavity. Coelom is nothing but fluid filled cavity lined all over the body with the mesoderm. Right? Now let's see one by one. Cytozoic is nothing but intracellular parasite. They live within the host cell. For example, Plasmodium vivax in men, you will understand about this in malaria. And then we have Nosema notabilis in Cephalospora polymorpha. Right? Here you can see the example of Plasmodium. This is RBC, and inside RBC you have Plasmodium. Right? Next one is histozoic parasite. They live between the cell, not inside the cell. In between the cells of tissue they will be living. We call it as histozoic parasite. For example, Wuchereria bancrofti, Antamoeba histolytica. Trophozoite of Antamoeba histolytica. Put question mark over here. You will understand this in upcoming classes. Coelozoic parasite, that means where it lives within the cavity. Coelom means what? Cavity. Now, they are called enterozoic parasite. Why enterozoic? Enteric word. Do you remember when we use enteric word? It is nothing but the cells of intestine. The cells of intestine we call it as enteric cells, especially small intestine cell ko, or I can say the cells of intestine we call it as enteric cell. That's the reason I call them enterozoic. Why? Because they live in the alimentary canal. Okay. Example, Ascaris lumbricoid. The female mosquito is not considered as an obligate parasite. Put question mark over here. This also you will understand in upcoming classes. Then you have another type of parasite, that is hyperparasite. Parasite which lives in or on the parasite. Now till now we have studied parasite on the host. This one is, how do we remember this? Generally we say na, why are you getting hyper? जब गुस्सा आता है तो हम बोलते हैं ना, why are you getting hyper? That means you are going to harm yourself, right? So here parasite is going to live in or on the parasite, so it is going to harm the another parasite, right? Now parasites which live in or on the body of another parasite, we call it as hyperparasite. For example, Nosema notabilis, that is nidosporian parasite. It lives in Cephalospora polymorpha, that is nidosporian parasite again, which lives in the urinary bladder of the toadfish. Now see here, this is Nosema notabilis, which lives in the Cephalospora. This is, let me write. And I'm writing. Then we have Sophora, Spora, Polysperma. Now this entirely where it will be present? It will be present in the urinary bladder of the toadfish, right? Urinary bladder of the toadfish. Then the next one, monogenetic parasite. Monogenetic parasite, mono means what? One. Now here genetic means I'm not talking about the gene and chromosome. Here it is nothing but a parasite which completes whole life cycle only in one host. Now still if you want to connect it with the gene, you can say that when the whole life cycle is completed in one host, so in this completion of whole life cycle, obviously there will be the reproduction process. When there is a reproduction process, obviously there will be the talk of the genetics and the chromosome, right? So monogenetic is nothing but it completes whole its life cycle in one host. Example, your Antamoeba histolytica and Ascaris lumbricoid. Next one, digenetic parasite. Di means two. So it is going to complete whole its life cycle into two hosts. It is going to complete whole its life cycle into two hosts. For example, Plasmodium vivax, it is going to complete its life cycle in mosquito and human, right? Now Wuchereria bancrofti, again it is going to get complete its life cycle. Write it in the comment box. We have already studied this, right? Write it in the comment box. It is going to complete its life cycle in human and question mark. Now parasites lives in the gut. If it is living in the gut, we call it as enterozoic. Just now I told you enteric cells, the cells of intestine, we call it as enteric cells. So the parasite who lives in the gut, we call it as enterozoic. If we'll talk about the Ascaris, it is enterozoic, that means it stays in the gut, and it is coelozoic, that means it stays in the coelom also, cavity also. When we talk about Antamoeba histolytica, it is enterozoic, that means it stays in gut, as well as histozoic, that means it stays or affect the tissue cell, right? Now everything I have compiled in one table, so I want all of you to write this table. If we'll talk about the ectoparasite, lives on the surface, example head lice, itch mites, and all these examples we have already studied. Endoparasite lives inside the body host, and example I think okay, examples, all these are examples of endoparasite, right? Cytozoic parasite, intracellular, lives within the host cell, that is Plasmodium vivax and Nosema notabilis, right? Next one, histozoic, lives within the cell, right? Not inside the cell. Sorry, not within the cell. In between the cell. Within the cell, if I'll say, that is going to be intracellular. In between the cell, we call it as intercellular. We call it as intercellular. For example, Butyraria bancrofti and Antamoeba histolytica. Then coelozoic parasite within the cavity. Coelozoic means cavity. So it is present within the cavity, and cavity means I'm talking about the alimentary canal. And enterozoic parasites, they are called as, why? Because enteric cells. We use this term for intestinal cell, right? Example, Ascaris lumbricoid. Then hyperparasite lives on or in the another parasite, not host. Here the host is another parasite, right? Now, for example, Nosema notabilis, it's going to stay in Cephalospora polymorpha, and whole these things will stay in urinary bladder of the toadfish, right? Now, monogenetic parasite, which completes its life cycle in one host. Digenetic, which is going to complete its life cycle in two hosts, right? For example, for digenetic, Plasmodium vivax and Butyraria bancrofti, and for monogenetics, Antamoeba histolytica and Ascaris lumbricoid. By this, we are done with the types of parasite. Next, we will do in the another section, right? Thank you so much.